There is a photograph in the Library of Congress archive, black and white, dated sometime in 1963, of a kitchen in a house in the Midwest. You can tell it is the Midwest by the flatness visible through the window above the sink. The kitchen is small. The refrigerator is rounded at the top like a domed hat. There is a woman standing at the stove, and the stove has 4 burners and a clock built into the backsplash. And the clock says 20 minutes past 5. On the counter is a bag of flour, a mixing bowl, a coffee percolator. The linoleum floor has a pattern of small hexagons. There is no dishwasher. There is no microwave. There is no second counter. The kitchen is probably 11 feet by 9 feet, and in it, at 20 minutes past 5 on a weekday in 1963, a woman is making dinner for a family of 4. That photograph is the 1960s. Not the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, not the moon landing footage, not the protest images you have seen 1,000 times. That kitchen, that woman, that clock. That is what the decade was, for most of the people living inside it. The 1960s is the decade everyone thinks they understand. It has been processed by the nostalgia industry into a reliable product. The Volkswagen Bug, the tie-dye, the Woodstock footage, the Kennedy image in the motorcade, the impossibly clean suburban street in early footage before it all changed. The product is vivid and nearly useless as actual history. So here is the specific record, rendered straight. In 1960, the median American home cost $11,900. The median American salary was $5,600 annually. What that means, in practical terms, is that a house cost approximately 2.1 years of household income, a ratio that today, in most American markets, sits closer to 5.8 years of household income. That ratio is real. It is also incomplete, and honesty requires the incomplete part. The house that cost $11,900 was, on average, 1,100 square feet. 1 bathroom, 1 telephone, on the wall, in the kitchen or hallway, on a cord that reached approximately 4 feet from the receiver to the wall jack. In many parts of the country, rural areas, smaller towns, working-class neighborhoods in larger cities, that telephone was a party line. A party line meant your neighbor could pick up the phone while you were talking. It meant you waited your turn to make a call. It meant privacy was a structural absence, not a personal failure. There was no air conditioning in the median American home in 1960. Air conditioning existed. Window units had been manufactured since the late 1940s. But central air in a residence was a luxury that belonged to a different income bracket. The American summer before air conditioning was a specific physical experience. You slept with the windows open. The fan in the bedroom window pulled air that smelled of cut grass and asphalt and whatever the neighbors were cooking. You woke up already warm. This is not romantic. Anyone who lived through a July in Louisville or St. Louis or Memphis before air conditioning will not describe it as romantic. The median household in 1960 ran on 1 income. This is the number that carries the most freight in the popular imagination and the one that most requires honest context. Yes, a family of 4 could be housed, fed, clothed, and educated on 1 salary of $5,600 annually in 1960. The math worked at the median. It worked in part because the house was 1,100 square feet. It worked in part because the car was 1 car, not 2. It worked in part because the vacation was a drive to a lake 2 hours away, not a flight anywhere. It worked in part because college, for the children who went, cost a fraction of current tuition. The math worked. And for specific demographics, white, male-headed households in specific industries with union contracts, the math worked reliably. For Black American families in 1960, the math was different because the economy was different. The Federal Housing Administration's underwriting guidelines through the 1950s had systematically excluded black families from the federally backed mortgages that built the post-war suburb. The neighborhood of 1,100 square foot houses with the rounded refrigerators and the party line telephones was not equally available. The job paying $5,600 was not equally available. This is not a footnote to the decade. It is the structure of the decade, and any picture of 1960s daily life that omits it is a picture of a specific demographic, not of America. The woman in the photograph at the stove, making dinner at 20 minutes past 5. She could not, in 1963, open a bank account without her husband's signature. She could not, in most states, obtain credit in her own name. The Equal Credit Opportunity Act, which prohibited discrimination in credit on the basis of sex, was not passed until 1974. This is a specific fact. It means that the economic security of the household, the mortgage, the savings account, the credit line, was legally structured as belonging to the husband. The wife's labor, which ran the household, was categorically invisible to the financial system. And yet the dinner at 20 minutes past 5 was made. The house was maintained. The children were clothed and fed and walked to school. Let us talk about school. In the fall of 1962, a child in most American cities walked to school or rode a yellow bus. The school day began at 8:30 or 9 and ended at 3 or 3:15. The morning began with the Pledge of Allegiance, said standing, facing a specific flag mounted at the front corner of the room. The classroom smelled of chalk dust and wooden desks, and, on certain mornings, of the mimeograph machine down the hall. The mimeograph sheet, called a ditto in many regions after the Ditto brand machine, arrived in your hands still slightly damp and cool, and the ink was a specific shade of purple-blue, and it transferred to the side of your hand if you pressed hard writing on it before it dried fully. The smell was a chemical smell, sharp and specific, like something between ink and rubbing alcohol, and every person who attended American elementary school between roughly 1950 and 1985 carries that smell in memory somewhere. Nothing replaced it on the same sensory terms. The photocopier, which arrived in the mid-1970s and became standard in schools through the 1980s, produced black toner on white paper and smelled of nothing in particular. The ditto is gone. Its smell is completely gone. The school lunch in 1962 cost 25 cents in most districts. The tray was metal with divided compartments. The milk was whole milk, cold in a small glass bottle or a wax-coated cardboard carton. The lunch was almost always hot. A main item, a vegetable, bread, fruit, or dessert, milk. The National School Lunch Program had been federally established since 1946, and by 1962, it was reaching most public school children in America. The food was institutional. It was also, for many children in working class and poor families, the most reliably nutritious meal of the day. After school, a child in 1962 went home, or, in warmer months, outside. The outdoors until dinner rhythm that appears in so much 1960s nostalgia is real, but its relationship to safety requires specificity. The 1960s were not uniformly safer than today for children. Violent crime in American cities rose substantially through the decade and into the 1970s, reaching peaks in the late 1970s and early 1980s. The specific sense that children could roam freely was real in specific neighborhoods, in specific demographic conditions, in specific decades. It was also specifically unavailable in neighborhoods with different conditions. The nostalgia for unsupervised childhood is a nostalgia for a specific geography and a specific class position, as much as for a specific decade. What was real, across more contexts, was the texture of time. There was nowhere to be. There was nothing urgent. The afternoon between 3:15 and 5:30, before dinner and before the evening television, was a specific kind of unscheduled expanse that is genuinely difficult to reconstruct in a culture organized around constant scheduling and constant connectivity. Boredom was not a crisis to be managed. It was a condition out of which things happened. Games invented, books read, things built out of whatever was available in the garage. On Saturday morning, the television came on. In 1962, most American households had one television. 79% of American homes had a TV set by 1960, a market penetration that had occurred in roughly a decade from the late 1940s. The set was on a stand or built into a console cabinet, and it had a dial for changing channels, and the channels were numbered. In most markets, you had three choices: the local affiliates of CBS, NBC, and ABC. In smaller markets, sometimes two. The UHF band existed on some sets as a second dial, clicking through stations numbered 14 and above, pulling in a few local independent stations through static that never fully resolved. On Saturday morning, the children's programming began at 7 a.m. and ran until approximately noon. The experience of Saturday morning television in 1962 or 1966 or 1971 was the experience of a shared cultural moment across the entire country simultaneously. Every child in America watching cartoons on Saturday morning was watching one of the same three networks. There was no fourth option. There was no on-demand. There was no pause. If you missed the beginning of an episode, you had missed it until the rerun season in summer. This created a shared cultural vocabulary, specific characters, specific jingles, specific phrases that crossed geographic and class lines in ways that television no longer produces. The shared cultural vocabulary of the three-network era extended to prime time. On a Monday evening in October 1965, if you were watching television, you were watching one of approximately 6 or 7 programs. So was your neighbor and your neighbor's neighbor, and 25 million other households across the country. The water cooler conversation the next morning was not a metaphor. It was a literal shared experience because there were literally no other options. This is what disappears when you have a streaming library of 50,000 titles. Not quality, a specific kind of simultaneity. The grocery store in 1963 was a specific physical environment. It was smaller than the modern supermarket. The supermarket format as we know it was still expanding through the 1960s, and it had fewer items. A typical grocery store in 1963 carried approximately 7,000 distinct products. A modern supermarket carries between 30 and 50,000. The produce section was seasonal in a literal sense. You did not buy fresh strawberries in December because they did not exist in the store in December. Strawberries came in June from local or regional farms. Tomatoes came in August. The seasonal calendar of the grocery store was the seasonal calendar of the local growing region, with some exceptions for California produce that had begun moving east by rail. The television dinner existed by 1963 and was growing. Swanson had introduced its aluminum tray dinner in 1953, and by the early 1960s, the format was established. The standard dinner, Salisbury steak with compartments for peas and mashed potatoes, or turkey with gravy, went into the oven at 375 degrees for 25 minutes and came out in its divided tray. The mythology around TV dinners is worth correcting. They were not primarily a symptom of family decline or of women abandoning domestic duty. They were marketed to and used by working families who needed a meal that could be prepared without extended labor on a specific evening. The anxiety about TV dinners in the popular press of the 1960s tells you more about specific cultural anxieties around women working than it tells you about the actual families eating the dinners. Sunday was different from every other day. In most American communities in the early 1960s, Sunday meant that stores were closed. Blue laws, statutes regulating commerce on Sundays, were widespread, and their enforcement was real. The grocery store was closed. The department store was closed. The hardware store was closed. Sunday was structurally a non-commercial day, which meant it had a texture that the rest of the week did not have. The Sunday dinner was a specific ritual. In many households, it was the meal of the week that involved the most preparation and the most people at the table. The extended family that came over, or the specific cuts of meat that were reserved for Sunday. The telephone on the wall cost money to use for long distance. A 3-minute long-distance call in 1960 cost approximately $12 at equivalent purchasing power, the equivalent of roughly $120 by current measures. This is not a trivial number. It meant that when a family member moved across the country, and people moved across the country in the 1960s to find work, to follow industry, the separation was real in a way that is difficult to reconstruct now. You wrote letters. You waited for the letter to arrive, which took 3 to 5 days. You saved the long-distance call for the announcement that required immediate communication. The birth, the death, the emergency. The ordinary continuity of daily life, the kind maintained now by a text message sent and received in seconds, did not cross distance. Families who moved apart stayed apart in ways that are genuinely hard to imagine from inside a culture of frictionless communication. The doctor came to the house, in some communities, through the early 1960s. This is among the details that sounds most like mythology, but was real in specific geographies and demographics. The house call was declining by 1960. The American Medical Association was moving toward clinic and office-based practice, but in rural areas and in specific regions, a physician who made house calls was not a nostalgic fiction. The hospital was, for many families, a place you went for serious illness or surgery, not for routine care. Routine care happened at the family doctor's office, and the family doctor, in many cases, was a single individual who had delivered every child in a family and knew the household's medical history from memory. The shadow of polio fell across childhood in a way that it does not now, because it was defeated. The Salk vaccine was approved in 1955, and the Sabin oral vaccine followed by 1962, and the near eradication of polio from American life within a decade was among the specific victories of that period. But for the children who had watched other children in iron lungs, who had been kept away from swimming pools in summer because of polio fears, who had grown up understanding that a summer illness could result in paralysis, that fear was real and specific. The children who received the Sabin oral polio vaccine on a sugar cube in the early 1960s were receiving one of the most consequential medical interventions in American history, though few of them understood it as such at the time. Measles, before the measles vaccine approved in 1963, hospitalized approximately 48,000 American children per year. The car was a significant presence. In 1960, car ownership had become nearly universal in suburban and rural America, and the car shaped the geography of daily life in specific ways. The suburb built after 1950 was designed for a car, not for a pedestrian, not for a streetcar, for a car. The drive to the grocery store, the drive to school, the drive to church, the drive to the drive-in movie theater, these were not luxuries. They were the physical structure of life in the communities where most Americans lived. The drive-in theater is worth a paragraph. At its peak in 1958, there were approximately 4,000 drive-in theaters operating in the United States. By 1963, the number was declining, but still substantial. You pulled in on a gravel lot, hung the speaker on the driver's side window, and watched a movie through the windshield while the sky went dark. The snack bar was a walk from the car. The movie started at dusk. Children in pajamas fell asleep in the back seat before it ended. The drive-in was not only adolescent romance, though it was that too. It was a specific family entertainment technology, a movie theater that accommodated the logistical difficulty of bringing young children somewhere that required silence and stillness. It died not primarily because of changing values, but because of the economics of suburban land use. A drive-in required a large, flat piece of land near enough to population to be viable, and by the 1970s and 1980s, that land in most markets was worth more as commercial development. The Saturday routine ran roughly like this: breakfast, often eggs, toast, possibly oatmeal in colder months, followed by Saturday morning cartoons until noon, followed by chores or outdoor time in the afternoon, followed by the specific ritual of the Saturday evening bath, followed by Saturday evening television. Lawrence Welk for some households, Carol Burnett for others, beginning in 1967. The Carol Burnett Show ran from 1967 to 1978, with a creative team that included Harvey Korman, Tim Conway, Vicki Lawrence, and Lyle Waggoner, and its production values: live studio audience, live sketches, the specific danger of live comedy where anyone might break, created an energy that the pre-recorded sitcom could not replicate. Carol Burnett opened each show with audience interaction, taking questions from the crowd, and that real-time human contact was legible through the screen. You could feel that the people on camera were present, unrepeatable, slightly at risk. The thing that was real about the 1960s, the thing worth preserving in the record, is this: the texture of time was different. Not better. Different. There were hours in the day that were not scheduled, not optimized, not productive in any measurable way. The afternoon stretched. The Saturday had a shape. The Sunday had a weight. The ritual meals, the shared television, the seasonal grocery store, the letter that took 5 days, these were not inconveniences that the era had not yet solved. They were the structure of a specific way of being in time. What was also real? The specific constraints that held that structure in place were not equally distributed. The woman who could not open a bank account, the family that was excluded from the neighborhood, the child who went to the underfunded school, the worker who was not in the union. Their experience of the decade's texture was different. The nostalgia that only sees the shared Saturday morning cartoons and not the party line telephone, that only sees the one-income household and not the legal constraints that held women in it, that only sees the drive-in and not the sundown town. That nostalgia is not memory. It is selection. The complete picture is harder and more interesting. The house cost 2.1 years of income and was 1,100 square feet with one bathroom. The mimeograph paper was cold and smelled of purple chemical, and the ink transferred to your hand. The Saturday morning was shared across 25 million households simultaneously, an experience of cultural simultaneity that no longer exists. The Sunday was structurally quiet by law. The long-distance phone call cost what it cost, and the distance between people was real. The measles vaccine changed what childhood illness meant. These things coexisted. The warmth of the shared television moment and the legal invisibility of the woman making dinner. The specific smell of the mimeograph and the specific fear of a summer polio outbreak. The drive-in at dusk and the sundown sign at the edge of the next county. Memory does the era no favors when it chooses only the warm parts. And it does the era no favors when it refuses the warmth entirely. The woman in the photograph in the Library of Congress, in the kitchen at 20 minutes past 5, made dinner that evening. The clock above the stove said 20 minutes past 5. The floor was hexagon linoleum. The percolator was on the counter. What she was thinking is not recorded. That is what the 1960s was. Not a brand, not a soundtrack. A specific woman, a specific kitchen, a specific clock. A world organized differently than ours in specific ways, some of which were better and some of which were not, all of which are worth knowing exactly. Comment below with the specific detail from this era that you remember or that someone you loved moved through. The smell, the sound, the specific object on the counter. The record lives in what you actually remember, not in what the nostalgia industry decided to package and sell. Subscribe if you want the era told straight. The specific version, not the greeting card version, not the cynical debunking version. The one that treats what people lived through with the care it earns.